How's going guys, welcome to the channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto got harem with Alexstrasza, Jaina and Sylvanas. Huge shout out to Kappa12 for this story. If you wants to see awesome fanfiction like this, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get into the video. He felt the cold of the void pierce his skin, and the pitch blackness that surrounded him, all around him was nothing but darkness. He remembered the final moments he had experienced in his world before falling through the strange void-like portal that had taken him here. He remembered fighting Kaguya alongside his team. Kaguya had already taken out Sasuke with the uchiha having passed his chakra onto him, but even with the chakra boost and Sasuke's Taijutsu being passed to him, Kaguya proved to be a tough opponent. In the end he decided to use his knowledge of seals to try and seal her, but that had not gone completely to plan. The sealing technique he had used ended up reacting differently to Kaguya than he had originally calculated, having never used it on a live person before and having only thought of the plan on the fly. In the end the seal absorbed all of Kaguya's chakra down to the last drop into him, and due to its creator no longer being around her dimension collapsed and dragged him in through one of the many rifts that had opened up. Thankfully he was able to reverse the infinite Tsukiyomi in that short period of time, but had not been able to see where Sakura or Kakashi had gone. He hoped they were able to escape the dimension. "Where are we, Kurama?" "Kurama?" Naruto asked his Jinchuriki partner, but received no response from him. Before he could ask his partner again, a sharp burning pain shot throughout his entire chakra system, as if fire was running through it. As the pain intensified, he saw a large rift open similar to the one that had taken him to this void. Summoning all the strength in his body to withstand the pain, he used his flight from his sixth pass chakra and launched himself towards the void. All he could see around him was a bright flash of colors before they disappeared. Another burning sharp pain went through him in his chakra network, causing him to close his eyes. After a while he started to feel strong winds hit him and opened his eyes, only to see himself falling towards the ground. Just below himself he saw a small lake and adjusted his body to dive towards the lake. As he continued falling, he tried to call on his chakra. Even though the pain was extraordinary, he knew he needed it if he didn't want a painful landing, and coated himself in chakra. He continued falling, now coated in his chakra, protecting him from the fall, and could see the lake approaching closer and closer. As he got close enough to the lake, he could with his sharp vision make out a figure in the lake that, from what he gathered, looked to be bathing. Before he could make out any of the features of the figure, he plummeted into the water, sending a large tidal into air, along with a deafening splashing sound. A few minutes earlier. Jaina Proudmoore sighed in exhaustion and relaxed into the cool waters of the lake, eager to get the tiredness out of her mind and body. She had just been making her way from Lordaeron City back to Dalaran when she spotted the fresh spring of water nearby a small village and decided to take a relaxing dip in the lake before continuing on her journey back to Dalaran. Since becoming the apprentice to Archmage Antonidas, her life had been busy with constant study and learning of the magical arts, and while she enjoyed studying and wanted to become one of the most powerful mages on Azeroth, everything had started to become boring after her studies had fallen into a pattern that she had memorized at this point. She wanted something exciting in her life for once. It didn't help that she had recently gotten into an argument with her betrothed Arthas Menethil, the crown prince of Lordaeron. It seemed he had started to get more involved in the running of the kingdom's affairs, both internal and foreign, and had heard of how her father had pulled his fleet, wanting to give his men and his fleet much needed rest from the end of the Second War, which had ended a few years ago. The prince did not like her father's actions and had ranted on how he should have listened to his father and his oath to the alliance. This had led to an argument in which she had reminded the prince that her father was a sovereign ruler of his kingdom and was merely doing what was best for his people and wasn't there to be at Lordaeron's beck and call. She had stormed out of the city after their argument had taken place and wished to get back to her studies in Dalaran and had opted to travel by conventional means rather than teleportation, hoping the journey might take her mind off the matter. Jaina put the thoughts behind her and sank even further into the lake's cool waters. Before she could relax again, she felt a powerful burst of arcane energy shoot above her in the sky. She looked up to see where the burst of power had emerged from and saw something falling from the sky at a rapid rate. As the object approached closer, she could briefly make out the shape, and it looked similar to a person before whatever it was splashed into the water near her position, causing a large tidal wave to launch into the air. Jaina called upon her magic and shielded herself from the wave of water. After the water subsided, Jaina made her way to where the silhouette had landed and could see an arm start to sink into the water. Thinking quickly, she dived down into the water and started to pull the individual out of the water, uncaring for her state of undress right now. She was eventually able to get him out of the water. She was finally able to get a good look at the individual that she had pulled from the water. He was a handsome man around her age. He had golden blonde hair and what looked to be 3 whisker marks on each cheek. Jaina blushed upon seeing that he had extremely well-built physique, far beyond any she had seen even her own betrothed. He possessed rock-hard abs from what Jaina had felt but was not overly muscular, instead having a figure that was sleek and prioritized speed but still looked like it was carved from stone. As she examined him further, his eyes started to open, showing azure blue eyes. Naruto, despite coating himself in chakra, still felt the impact of landing in the water before he felt himself be pulled out of the water and dragged out of the water. His eyes slowly opened and blinked rapidly before his vision started to clear. He saw a figure kneeling next to him. It looked to be a girl around his age. She had golden blonde hair similar to his own with bright blue eyes. "Who are you?" Naruto said, his voice raspy and his body finally registering all the pain and damage it had suffered traveling through the void. He was able to get a good look at the girl that had saved him and blushed when seeing the state of dress she was in. She possessed large D-cup breasts with a curvy hergless figure, possessing thick thighs and a heart-shaped face. Jaina noticed where he was looking and blushed, attempting to cover herself up. Naruto felt the same sharp burning pain rush through his chakra network and let a pained scream as the pain got unbearable and caused him to lose unconsciousness. Jaina heard his pained scream and saw him lose unconsciousness. "No. Don't die on me now, damn it," Jaina screamed. She heard hurried footsteps approaching her and realized it must have been her entourage that had been escorting her back to Dalaran. Quickly using her magic to clothe herself again, a group of guardsmen clad in plate armor arrived with the captain of the guard kneeling next to the body of Naruto. "Lady Jaina, are you alright?" We heard a loud sound. "And who is this man?" the captain said, looking down at the man that seemed to be unconscious and had sustained quite a few injuries. "Captain, I am fine, but we need to find him some help quickly," Jaina said. "He fell from into the lake and collapsed from his injuries." "I don't know who he is, but he seemed to speak a strange language before he collapsed," Jaina said. The captain nodded and ordered his men to carry the blonde to the nearby village where they would be able to get a healer. A while later. "I have done all I can for him, my lady. His body seems to be suffering from some sort of mana poisoning effect that I can't seem to heal. It would best he goes to Dalaran. They may be able to help him better," the healer said, a veteran priest from the First War. He had healed as much of the damage as he could, but the blonde's body seemed to be suffering from an unusual energy poisoning effect he had not seen before. Jaina nodded her head at the healer who exited the room. Now alone with the blonde she had rescued, she sat down on the seat next to the bed that had been placed, calling upon her mana as she sensed the power that was residing within the man. It wasn't like anything she had ever felt, and his pool of energy seemed endless. The closest she had come to feeling this energy had been the Sunwell, an endless font of magic on the high elven island of Quildanas. She wondered what could cause an individual such as this to suffer the wounds that he had. Who was that man to end up so injured and dumped before her? Jaina was no stranger to injury and death, despite her parents trying to shelter her from the more harsh elements of the world. Archmage Antonidas showed her the truth of such things when he agreed to apprentice her in the ways of magic. Still, his appearance was too sudden to be any sort of attempt on her life, though she had close calls in the past with assassins and those who were jealous of her talents, but she could not shake the thought that this could be a potential ploy by the forces of the Horde. Yet she hoped her theory was wrong, and the male in that room was just an unfortunate victim of happenstance. As she continued gazing at the man she had rescued, Jaina struggled to keep her eyes open as she stared at the resting form of the young man before her. With nothing else to occupy her thoughts for the time being, Jaina slowly succumbed to sleep as the gentle breathing of her new responsibility sent her to sleep under heavy eyelids. A few hours later. Naruto felt his consciousness return to him. The first thing that was immediately clear to him was that he was no longer near the lake as he felt the soft bed he was laying on, as well as the warmth from the room. He slowly opened his eyes to see himself in a large room that looked to be in an inn. He looked around the room before his eyes landed on the woman sitting on the chair next to him with her head laid on the bed. She was the exact same woman he had seen before passing out and looked to be his age. He wouldn't have to wait long though as the woman started to awake, stretching her arms and yawning, which caused her chest to bounce and thrust out. Naruto blushed and looked away briefly before the woman noticed him and compassed herself in front of him. "You're awake," the healer said. "It'd take a while for you to wake up, but that was quicker than I thought it would be," Jaina said. Naruto looked at the woman confused as to how he could understand her when he had heard her panicked shouts in another language just before he had fully lost consciousness. "How can I understand you?" Naruto asked. "Oh, that's just the enchanted necklace around your neck. It translates anything into whatever language you speak. I hear what you are saying in my language, and you hear what I say in your language," Jaina said, smiling to herself when she saw the blonde look down at the necklace around his neck. It was a fairly simple necklace with a purple crystal in the middle that reminded Naruto of the first Hokage's necklace that Tsunade had gifted him. It glowed a soft purple light when Naruto touched it. Naruto looked confused at the blonde woman's words and inquired what she meant by enchantment. "Enchanted? What do you mean by that?" Naruto questioned. Jaina looked at the man puzzled as to why he didn't know what an enchanted item was. Every person in Azeroth from kings and nobles to peasants, and even the orcs, knew what an enchanted item or enchantment was. It seemed whoever this man was he was not from Azeroth and had not been sent by the Orcish horde, but still she remained weary. Enchanted as in using magic through an enchantment, Jaina said. Naruto frowned at what the woman told him. The only magic he had encountered had been from lousy street performers who claimed what they could do was magic, but he hadn't encountered anything like this before. This, combined with the fact that they spoke a weird, entirely different language, did not fill him with much hope that he had arrived back at the elemental nations. Naruto looked down in sadness at the realization that he may never see his friends or the village again. Jaina noticed the man's saddened expression. She wondered if it might have something to do with him arriving somewhere he had no knowledge and likely was far from his home. He looked back up at her with a small glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Have you perhaps heard of a place called Konoha, or at least the elemental nations?" Naruto asked, his voice filled with a bit of hope that maybe he had simply landed on the other side of the world. "I'm sorry, I haven't heard of anywhere like that before. You're on Azeroth in the continent of the Eastern Kingdoms," Jaina replied to the blonde, who looked down dejected. "Is that where you come from?" Jaina asked, wanting to get a bit more information on the man she had rescued that would hopefully help her in solving this mystery that had appeared in front of her so suddenly. The mage in her wanted to unravel this mysterious stranger and learn all that she could, even if it involved some risk of him potentially being dangerous, but she trusted in her skills in magic. Besides, her conversation so far with him has been civil and he showed no signs that he was dangerous. "Yeah, it's my home, or at least it was until I got sucked through that tear in space," Naruto replied sadly. Jaina saved that information for later. She had heard of entities arriving on Azeroth through tears, but none of them had been human like he was. "You don't have to lose hope. At Dalaran we have all sorts of knowledge on magic, with some even written on space-time. We might be able to find something that could help you get back home," Jaina said in a hopeful voice, trying to uplift the blonde spirit somewhat. "We are going to have to go there regardless. The healer said that your body has been poisoned by some sort of energy, similar to the mana we use for magic, and they can help heal you," said Jaina. Poison, Naruto thought. He wondered if that might be why his chakra was not fully responding to him. He still felt the Bijuu's chakra inside him along with the chakra that he had absorbed from Kaguya. Accessing the chakra still brought back the same burning pain he had felt earlier. He knew had to be careful when using the chakra, and if they could help heal him, he would take them up on their offer. He also wanted to know if they had a way of getting him back home, or at least pointing him in the right direction. "Ah damn, I forgot to ask your name." "My name is Jaina." Jaina Proudmore, Jaina said, facepalming at a realization that she had not asked for the blonde's name and had not given him her own. "Naruto Uzumaki," replied Naruto. Jaina nodded at the blonde before getting up and preparing to leave the room to allow the blonde to rest. "You should rest, Naruto. It's going to be a long journey to Dalaran and you will need the rest," Jaina replied. Naruto nodded to the buxom blonde and laid back down on the bed. "Thank you for saving me," Naruto said. "It's alright. I was just doing the right thing." "I'm sure you would do the same," Jaina replied, smiling at the blonde. Naruto nodded before laying down on the bed to rest. Jaina left the room and made her way back to her room for the night to rest. As she laid on her bed, she wondered what fate had in store for her and the mystery of the blonde that had appeared in front of her so suddenly. "Naruto, huh? I can't wait to solve this mystery," Jaina thought. The mage in her eager to find out who he was and to solve the mystery of the blonde. Next morning. Naruto woke with a yawn and stretched his arms to release the tiredness within his body. Last night had been draining for him and had not gotten much sleep. The events of yesterday had come as a shock to him. Everything he knew and loved was whoever knows where out there in the cosmos, that is if it was even the same universe or dimension where he had landed. Despite having been flung to who knows where on this strange place, Naruto did not lose hope. After all, he had faced down a goddess. This would just be another challenge for him to overcome. Eventually Naruto got ready and met Jaina downstairs in the inn where they were getting something to eat while they discussed Naruto's current situation. "So this place that you mentioned, Dalaran, what is it?" Naruto asked. "Dalaran is the capital city of the nation of the same name. It's home to the Kirin Tor, the council of Magi that ruled Dalaran," Jaina said. "It also holds most of Azeroth's knowledge on magic. I'm sure there would be a way to find your home and get you back home," Jaina said, smiling to the blonde. They continued discussing magic and Azeroth's history, with Naruto learning about the First and Second Great War and how the Orcish horde had invaded through something called the Dark Portal. Naruto wondered if it would be possible for him to use that to get home, but Jaina understood what he was thinking and had explained to him that the Dark Portal was extremely dangerous and remained dormant for quite a while. "You said my body was suffering from some kind of poison effect. How will they be able to help me in Dalaran?" Naruto asked, wanting to know how they would be able to help him as he did feel that a foreign energy had entered his body. He hadn't been able to sense it when he had woken up from being unconscious as his mind was too tired, but when he had woken up this morning, he had detected that in addition to the chakra from Kaguya, his body had absorbed a foreign energy that he felt everywhere in Azeroth's surroundings. He had heard Jaina call it arcane energy and wanted to learn more about this energy and if it could be one of the causes that wasn't allowing him to access all of his chakra. The healer said that your body is suffering from mana poisoning. The mages of Dalaran are masters of the arcane arts, they will be able to help you by cleansing your body of the energy, Jaina said. My mentor is Archmage Antonidas, he is the Grand Magus of the Kirin Tor and has vast knowledge, he should be able to also help you with finding your way home, Jaina said. Naruto nodded to Jaina before they made their way out of the tavern and started to make their way to the stables. They were only a short ride from Dalaran. They eventually arrived at the stables where they saw the captain and his men getting the horses ready. The captain was a human male of average height with black hair and brown eyes. Captain Leroy, are the men ready to ride out? Jaina asked. Yes my lady, they are ready to go, but we have received word there are reports of ore creators on the road ahead, so we have to be careful, Leroy responded. I see, do you have extra weapons and armor that Naruto would be able to borrow in case we encounter them or any other trouble? Jaina asked. Yes I do my lady, follow me, I have some extra armor over here, Leroy replied, motioning Naruto to follow him. Naruto followed the captain to some equipment that was laid nearby the stables. He could see a set of leather armor and a sword. It's only basic armor, but it should offer some protection. The name is Leroy by the way, said Leroy, holding his hand out to shake the blondes. Naruto shook his hand. Naruto, it's nice to meet you, and thanks for the armor, said Naruto. Naruto then grabbed the armor before putting the armor on, finding it was much similar to the shinobi armor he had seen before and used. He then unsheathes the sword, seeing a normal one-handed steel straight sword, and attaches it to his hip before making his way back to where Jaina and the captain and his men were. He saw Leroy standing next to a brown horse. Can you ride a horse? Leroy asked. Naruto shook his head negatively. They did have horses in his world, but shinobi had never needed to use them, having always been faster than the average horse. It's okay captain, he can ride with me, Jaina said, offering to allow the blonde to ride with her so that she could keep a closer eye on him and also in case the mana poisoning acted up again, she could temporarily help him with her magic. Are you sure it's okay? Naruto said. Jaina nodded at the blonde. Naruto then got on the horse, struggling initially, which caused a few giggles from Jaina before he finally sat down behind her on the horse. Jaina blushed slightly as she felt the blonde's powerful body press up against her own, even within the leather she could still feel the power in his muscles. You can hold on to me if it gets unstable, Jaina said, stuttering slightly from the close contact. Behind her Naruto blushed slightly. Sure, Naruto replied, a bit embarrassed and unsure. Once all the men were on their horses, they made their way out of the small village and towards the city of Dalaran. Naruto wondered where his journey would take and if he would ever return home. Unbeknownst to him, this would just be the start of his adventure on Azeroth, and maybe he might find a new home in this new place. Naruto gazed around at the lush scenery of Azeroth as they rode towards their destination at a leisurely pace. The vast open green fields and deep forests reminded him of the Fire Country and its very similar terrain. He could feel how potent the natural energy was within the air, to the point that it nearly overwhelmed his senses before he was able to get his senses in order. Focusing his senses and delving deeper, he found that this planet possessed not just one singular type of energy like his world did, but rather possessed various types of energies that all existed at once. Some of these energies connected and seemed more harmonized with each other, whereas others seemed to clash or ignore each other completely. As he explored further into the various energies of Azeroth, he felt a cold chill run up his spine and through his senses. He could feel various dark presences that seemed to be trapped deep beneath the earth. The cold presence felt very similar to that of the Juubi, yet it lacked the hate and anger that the tailed beast had, rather it felt cold, uncaring, yet he could feel it trying to attract him towards it. His eyes started to glaze over, and the cold chill that he felt before started running through his body again. Jaina gazed out at the passing scenery and admired the beauty of Azeroth. As they rode, she glimpsed at the massive Lake Lordamir that for centuries had kept the surrounding settlements and human kingdoms prosperous. The large body of water reminded of her home and her family back in Kultiras. Her mind wandered back to the many beaches of the island nation and the times her father had taken her on various sea voyages. The buxom blonde apprentice sighed in remembering those nostalgic memories, but before she could dwell further on them, she felt a cold chill next to her. Turning her head back, she saw her blonde traveling companion. His face seemed to have lost its normal bright complexion and had turned a cold pale color. His presence had turned cold and empty, which was contrary to what she had felt over the few days they had spent together. His normal warm presence that she had gotten used to over the past few days now felt cold and uncaring, almost as if his entire body had become a void. Naruto. Jaina asked curiously, trying to get a response from him as to why his presence had started to feel so cold all of a sudden. Gazing into his eyes, she could see that his vision had started to glaze over. Jaina stopped her horse and placed her hand on the blonde's shoulder, lightly shaking him. "Naruto, are you okay?" Jaina questioned, trying to get her blonde companion to respond and checking to see if he was okay. Naruto felt the cold presence trying to worm its way deeper into his mind, and he could start to hear whispers from odd twisted voices that promised him all sorts of things such as power and wealth. As he prepared to push the voices out his head, he felt himself get shocked and could hear a voice say his name. Snapping himself out of whatever had tried to worm its way into his mind, his vision returned and he could see the concerned look from his blonde companion. Shaking his head a few times and rubbing his eyes to set himself straight, he heard her concerned voice. "Are you okay?" You weren't responding, and your body started to feel cold all of a sudden, Jaina asked with a concerned voice. Naruto gave a reassuring smile and nodded his head. "I'm fine, yeah, just a little tired, that's all, and a bit disoriented from that mana poisoning," the whiskered blonde stated. He still did not truly know anybody within this world, and as Jiraiya and Kakashi had taught him, information was a shinobi's best tool when in any unknown situation. While Jaina and her group had been more than welcoming to him, healing him, providing him with food and clothing, he still knew that he had to keep information about himself close to his chest, as not everybody could be trusted. Jaina gazed worriedly at the blonde. She knew it was something more than just mana poisoning. She knew the cold feeling that she had felt from his body was different to anything related to mana poisoning. She knew he was still hesitant to share any information about himself and would give him the space he needed to open himself up more to her. "If you're sure, we are getting close to Dalaran anyway, so it won't be too long of a journey now anyway," Jaina said. "Well, that's good, I was getting tired of riding this damn horse. I don't know how you can ride these things," Naruto complained, feeling the soreness from the saddle, having never needed to use horses back in his world. Jaina giggled at her fellow blondes complaining and used this opportunity to get a bit more information about his world. "You don't have horses in your world?" Jaina inquired, as it would be quite odd that they wouldn't have such basic animals within their world, though there has been weirder stuff before, she had to admit to herself. "We do, we just never had to use them in this way, at least," Naruto replied back. "Why is that?" "I sense something coming this way," Naruto interrupted, having felt a sudden burst of killing intent and turned his head towards the direction where he had felt it coming from. Jaina snapped her head in the direction that the blonde had indicated. She couldn't see anything except for the deep bushes and forests, but knew that anybody could use those as cover to try and ambush them. She knew that it was a popular tactic of ore-creating parties to try and catch unsuspecting travelers off guard. She hoped that with her being there along with her escort, that it would deter them, but it seemed though that hadn't worked if her companion was to be believed. Putting her trust in her new companion's instincts, she signaled the captain of the guard to ready his men for an ambush. The men quickly got into a tight shield formation around Jaina and Naruto. The two blondes got off of their horse and drew their weapons, with Jaina readying her staff and magic, whereas Naruto unsheathed the sword given to him by Captain Leroy. The quiet stillness entered the surrounding area, with the only sounding being the ambience of nature and the occasional shuffling of some guards within the shield wall. "Lockter ogre." The monstrous battle cry rang out throughout the surrounding area as dozens of large shadows erupted out from the deep bushes and trees in the surrounding area and slammed into the shield wall created by the guardsmen. Despite the strong charge by the assailants, the guardsmen were able to hold the shield wall and push them back to a neutral position. Naruto took a moment to scan the battlefield and get a good look at their attackers. The unknown group that had attacked them was made up of 24 combatants. They all had an average height of 6 feet or above, and each one possessed a hulking mass muscle. They generally possessed a skin color ranging from green to brown. Unlike the humans he had met, they were clad in heavy armor, the likes of which he hadn't seen before. The armor looked far more rugged and cobbled together in comparison to the humans' more well-refined looking sets. It seemed these creatures preferred using large axes that looked unwieldy, yet Naruto could see they possessed a deadly sharp edge. "It seemed the captain's reports regarding ore-creating parties were true," Jaina stated, moving to stand next to the blonde. "So these are the orcs you told me about, they seem interesting," the blonde shinobi replied back, interested in the creatures that had invaded Azeroth. "Yeah, try to use your speed against them, don't try to engage them in a battle of strength," Jaina advised the blonde. Naruto nodded his head and turned his head back towards the group of Orcish raiders. Just as he turned to face them, he saw a green fireball erupt from out of the forest and slammed into the shield wall. The fire blazed around the battlefield and caught several of the soldiers off guard and caused them to start screaming in pain. Acting quickly, Jaina called upon her magic. Several arcane circles appeared on the battlefield and water gushed out around the battlefield, clearing the fire and saving some of the soldiers that hadn't already been burned to death. "My lady, they have a warlock with them," Captain Leroy said, taking up position next to the blonde duo. Naruto grew interested at the mention of this new enemy. It seemed that there was more than just one type of user of magic within this world and that at least these orcs had their own type of magic. I will handle the warlock, captain. Get your men to focus on the soldiers, Jaina ordered the captain. Leroy nodded his head and got to reorganizing his men and fighting against the orc soldiers. I'll help you against the warlock, Naruto said. Are you sure? Warlock magic can be dangerous. Jaina replied back. After all, the blonde had only been on Azeroth for a few days and was still suffering from the effects of the mana poisoning. Don't worry, I'll be fine, besides 2 is better than 1, Naruto replied. Jaina smiled back at the blonde and nodded her head. By now the soldiers were openly engaging the orcs in combat, having abandoned the shield formation due to the orcs going on the offensive and disrupting them from recreating the shield wall again. Naruto looked towards where the warlock's attack came from to see him standing there overlooking the battlefield. He was shorter than the other orcs and seemed to be clad robes rather than in armor. Brag. Naruto heard a shout coming from his left, diverting attention to the sound. He saw a large rushing towards him with his axe raised. The orc warrior swung his axe down in a fierce strike, hoping to cut the blonde in half, but Naruto deflected the blow with his sword, causing the orc to stumble. Using the opportunity, Naruto brought his sword down in a sideward slash and cut the orc's leg in half, disabling him before slicing his head off his body. Nice move, Jaina complimented the blonde, seeing that he was quite proficient with a blade, but before they could speak, another 2 orcs charged towards them. Jaina quickly called upon her magic, launching a flurry of frostbolts which impacted the orcs, causing them to freeze and shatter into multiple pieces. They continued fighting their way through the horde of enemies with their combination sword and sorcery, devastating the enemy orcs. Jaina hurled her magic, devastating the onrushing orc warriors and freezing them in their path, while Naruto carved a bloody path with his sword, slicing and slashing them as they came. Before the 2 could wreak any more havoc on the enemy ranks, a large bolt fell energy was hurled towards them. Jaina acted quickly and cast an arcane shield over them, blocking the attack from causing any damage. Naruto was becoming more and more impressed with the magic that his blonde companion had been displaying, but before he could inspect the magic further, he heard a battle cry before being impacted by a large body and hit the ground. Naruto! Jaina shouted as she saw a large orc warrior clad in heavier armor compared to the rest tackle the blonde and take him to the ground. Before she could help her new friend, the warlock launched several more attacks at her, this time employing fell fire into his attacks to try and kill the blonde apprentice. Jaina countered with her own ice magic and struck back with her own attacks. Soon the battle began between the magic users, with them trading blows back and forth. Naruto felt himself get thrown to the ground and a large weight pushed upon his body, holding him down. He looked up to see an orc clad in armor much more elaborate than the others pushing him down. The orc beat his fist back and launched it towards the blonde, aiming to pummel him, but Naruto acted quickly and leaned his head to the side. The orc's fist hit the ground next to the blonde. Naruto used the opportunity and grabbed a rather large dagger attached to the orc's hip and stabbed him in his outstretched arm. The orc screamed in pain as the blade dug into his flesh, leaving a deep stab wound. Naruto did not stop, instead he dug the blade in further and with it still impaled in the orc's arm, slashed upwards, causing a deep gash in the orc's arm. The orc got off the blonde, clutching his arm, giving the blonde time to get to his feet and grab his sword that was nearby. Naruto got into his sword stance again and prepared for his enemy to make the first move. The orc grabbed his axe and the 2 started to circle each other, looking for an opening to strike. "You'll pay for that, human," growled the orc at his opponent. This surprised the blonde, as he had not expected the orcs to be able to speak the common tongue of Azeroth with the way they had been described by some of the soldiers and peasants that he had heard talking about them. It seemed there was more to this horde than he had originally been led to believe. The orc charged forward and brought his axe down in an attempt to cleave the blonde, but Naruto, using his superior skill with a blade, parried the axe strike, stunning the orc. Using the opportunity, the blonde thrust his blade forward in an opening between the orc's armor and pierced the skin underneath. The orc roared in anger and attempted to swat the blonde with his large hand, but Naruto was able to duck underneath the incoming fist. Pulling the sword out from the orc, Naruto swung down while the orc was overextended, hitting him in the shoulder and slicing him across his shoulder. The orc cried out in pain and rage and lashed out with his axe. The 2 weapons clashed in a flurry of steel, parrying and deflecting each other's blows with their weapons. Naruto dueled with his opponent in a clash of sword and axe. Using his superior speed, he was able to counter the orc's strength and keep him on the back foot. The orc roared in frustration at the blonde's ability to dodge his attacks and constantly keep him on the back foot. Naruto felt the orc lash back with even more strength, but his movement seemed to have gotten sloppier and more uncoordinated, so he used that to his advantage and hooked the orcs with his sword and, with a few simple movements, disarmed the orc and caused the axe to fly out of his hand and out of reach. With no weapon, the orc simply resorted to using his brute strength and fists, but against a sword that was practically suicidal. Naruto made quick work of his enemy using his speed and agility. He dodged the orc's punches and putting his blade to use cut off the orc's right arm before striking him straight through the neck with a thrust, killing him. With the orc defeated, he turned his attention back to where his sorceress companion was fighting with the warlock. Jaina felt the warlock's corrupting spells strike against her arcane shield, strongly, almost causing her to falter, but she was able to withstand the corrupting magical barrage of fell energy and maintain her focus. Lowering her arcane shield, she struck back with her own arcane attacks, sending forth several arcane missiles towards her opponent. The missiles of arcane energy soared through the air and struck against the orc warlock's barrier of fell magic, preventing him from taking any damage. Jaina, seeing that her opponent was using a barrier to protect himself, called upon her mana reserves and unleashed a barrage of ice lances at the orc warlock, breaking the barrier he had casted to protect himself. Before she could unleash another spell, she felt herself get hit in the shoulder. Naruto saw the blonde sorceress get hit in the shoulder and collapsed to one knee. The blonde quickly scanned the battlefield to see that an orc archer had fired an arrow at her, hoping to kill her. Acting quickly, he grabbed the nearby dagger and used his precision aim that he had built up as shinobi, launched the dagger through the air. The dagger hurtled through the air like a bolt of lightning and hit the orc straight in the head, killing him instantly. Before he could rush to help his companion, he saw that the warlock had recovered from barrage and was preparing to unleash his magic again. Naruto rushed towards the warlock, grabbing a shield off one of the fallen soldiers. He charged towards the warlock. Before he could reach his opponent though, the warlock launched a stream of fellfire towards the blonde, attempting to incinerate him. The blonde, seeing the stream of green demonic fire, raised his shield and blocked the fire from hitting. The blonde continued his charge with his shield raised, but soon the fire caused the shield to grow too hot, so he discarded the shield just as he was getting close to the warlock. The orc warlock saw that the blonde was quickly nearing his position and hurled a shadow bolt towards the blonde, trying to stop him from getting within melee range. Naruto saw the shadow bolt heading towards him, but using his agility as the shinobi dodged out of the way of the bolt and got within melee range of the warlock. As he was now within range of the warlock, the blonde launched forward and unleashed a flurry of attacks at the warlock, who had only just managed to grab the axe he seldom used that was attached to his hip. The orc warlock knew he could not contend with the blonde's skills in close combat and had taken a few hits already, so he stepped backwards to separate himself from the blonde and launched another shadow bolt at the blonde. Naruto attempted to dodge the warlock's attack, but due to the close proximity, was only able to partially dodge the attack and felt himself get pushed back. As Naruto attempted to get back up from the attack, he felt the burning pain of the mana poisoning from before striking him again and forcing him to one. Orc used that opportunity to attack the blonde with his devastating drain life spell to try and drain the life from the blonde shinobi. Naruto felt the burning pain increase twice-fold and could also feel his very essence being drained from himself, similar to the time he had faced a red-haired woman called Fuka, though this felt far more powerful than that one. The orc warlock gained an evil smirk when he felt the blonde's life force start to rush into him, but before he could gain any more life force, he felt an icy barrage strike him and launch him backwards. The warlock looked to where the barrage was coming from and could see the blonde mage from earlier as the source of the attack. Jaina pushed herself to her feet and poured her mana into a large lance made of ice and launched it straight at the warlock. The orc tried to bring his barrier up again, but this ice lance proved to be much more powerful than the previous ones and completely tore through his barriers, freezing everything in its path including him and shattering into 1,000 pieces, killing him. The blonde sorceress collapsed to her knees as her wounds finally got to her. Naruto recovered from the burning pains of the mana poisoning and the draining effect that had happened to him and got to his feet. He looked up to see that the warlock was shattered into thousands of pieces. He looked to where Jaina was, worried about the injury that she had sustained, and saw that she was collapsed on her knees with the arrow that had hit her still lodged in her shoulder. Naruto quickly rushed over to where the blonde sorceress was and gently grabbed her, leaning her against one of the nearby large rocks. "Jaina, can you hear me? This is going to hurt for a bit, okay, but it's gonna get better," Naruto said to his fellow blonde. Jaina still heard him despite the pain and nodded her head. Naruto braced himself and grasped the arrow and with a quick strong pull, unlodged the arrow from her shoulder. Jaina cried out in pain as the arrow was pulled from her shoulder. Blood started quickly pouring out from her shoulder. Naruto quickly pushed his hand against the wound to try and stop the blood flow. He closed his eyes and started to focus, trying to call upon his sixth path chakra to try and heal her. He felt the searing pain from before but pushed it down and started to force more of his chakra through his system to try and get it work. "Work, damn it, I can't let her bleed out and die," the blonde thought in frustration and forced more and more chakra through his system. Jaina could feel the blood pouring out from her wound and could feel her consciousness start to slip. She could feel heavy grunts of pain next to her and turned her head to see where it came from. She saw what looked to be her mysterious blonde traveling companion, but this time he seemed to be covered in the bright gold cloak of energy. She could feel the vast energy irradiating off the blonde, and its energies felt similar to that of the holy light, mixed with what seemed to be energy similar to that of the druidic magic. Naruto felt his six paths cloak emerge and encompass him, but the pain was excruciating. He pushed the pain down and placed his right hand against Jaina's wound and called upon the healing technique he used on Guy. He saw the wound start to close, and the blood stopped flowing. He pushed even more chakra into her to stop her from losing consciousness. Jaina could feel the exhilarating and revitalizing energies of whatever her friend was channeling and could feel herself restored and all the tiredness, fatigue and pain of the wound leave her body. Naruto could feel his consciousness start to slip as the pain of calling upon his chakra despite the poisoning finally caught up to him and he felt himself collapse. Jaina acted quickly and caught the blonde and placed him in her lap as he succumbed to the pain and fell unconscious. Jaina quickly placed her fingers on the blonde's and checked his pulse. Finding a clear pulse, she sighed in relief and looked to see that her men had defeated most of the orcs, with a few remaining having retreated. Jaina gazed at the blonde lying in the tent that had been put up by her guards to allow for the blonde to recover from the battle and for him to regain consciousness. She had wondered what that strange power had been that he had wielded to cure her injuries. The blonde continued to bring up more and more questions on his origins, and the mystery that surrounded him continued to intrigue and fascinate her. The buxom blonde checked over her companion's injuries, finding that most of them had healed up quite quickly, leaving nothing behind with his skin being completely unblemished. Her attention turned towards a small previously unnoticeable scar just near where his heart was located. The scar looked to be quite old and most of the injury had healed, but it still left behind a small scar that she hadn't noticed before when she had found the blonde and taken him to the healer. What could have caused you to get this injury, I wonder, Jaina thought, placing her hand on the scar and running her fingers over it, examining the aftermath of the injury and wondering what type of attack could have caused this, as based on what she had seen after the battle with the orcs, the blonde seemed to regenerate from the few injuries he had picked up during the fighting. Before Jaina could wonder any further on the scar, the blonde stirred from his unconscious state. Naruto opened his eyes to find himself staring at the roof of what looked to be a tent and started to push himself into a semi-seated position on the fur bedding placed beneath him. He looked up to see that the blonde bombshell that had saved and healed earlier was looking over at him with a relieved expression on her face. I hope this doesn't turn into a regular occurrence, Naruto said jokingly. Oh? I thought you liked my company, here I thought we were getting closer, Jaina said in fake hurt tone. Forgive me, my lady, I didn't mean to undermine the pleasure of your company and your beauty, Naruto replied back jokingly. The two blondes laughed in amusement at each other's antics. Are you okay though? Taking a hit from a warlock's soul-draining magic can cause serious damage, Jaina said with a serious expression on her face and leaned closer to the blonde. I feel fine for the most part, the effects of whatever he hit me with seem to have worn off, but I want to know why the pain from earlier started to occur again, Naruto asked. It's most likely due to the fell energy from the warlock's magic reacting to what's happening inside your body. Many archmages have studied the fell during the First and Second Wars, and they found that it's the exact opposite of arcane energy, Jaina explained. So when the warlock hit me with his magic, the two energies must have clashed, Naruto deduced. Jaina nodded her head at the blonde, as his deduction was true, as it seemed the most likely case of what had happened. Speaking of the battle, there is something I wanted to ask you, Jaina asked in her most friendliest tone, as she wanted the blonde to open up to her. She knew that they didn't know each other well enough to share everything between each other, but hoped the blonde would still at least share something more about himself. Naruto's ears immediately perked up when heard her. He had a feeling what the mage apprentice was going to ask him and internally debated on what he should tell her. He felt that having saved him and fought alongside him, she deserved to know at least something, but still felt that he should keep most of it hidden at least until a time when they knew each other better. He enjoyed her company a lot as she was easily one of the most inquisitive and smartest people he had met in his life. That power you used to heal me with, what was that? Jaina asked. She saw the blonde close his eyes for a few seconds and contemplate, perhaps he was thinking on whether he should tell her or not. Naruto opened his eyes and gazed straight into Jaina's ocean blue eyes. That was a power from my world, it's called chakra, something that has been natural to my people. Much like the magic that you have here on Azeroth, Naruto told the buxom blonde. Chakra sounds interesting, it might not be much, but at least I have gotten him to open up a bit more, Jaina thought. Before she could inquire any further, she heard some footsteps coming towards them from outside the tent. The two blondes looked to see Captain Leroy had entered the tent. My lady, if Naruto is recovered, I recommend we get moving. The orcs may try and come back with reinforcements, Leroy said. Jaina nodded at him and turned her head back towards the blonde. Naruto nodded his head at her in understanding and got up from his position. A few minutes later, the company had prepared and started to get on the move again towards the city of Dalaran. A city of Dalaran, capital of the magocratic nation of the same name. Although it housed a majority human population, it was open to all races within Azeroth and oftentimes stayed neutral in most affairs. One of the few times the nation had joined in any geopolitical situation was when the Orcish hordes invaded and the nation had offered the expertise of its many magical users in order to combat the horde and their endless onslaught against the races of Azeroth. Naruto gazed at the large walls and massive towers that pierced high into the sky. He had never seen a city built in this style of architecture before, leaving him in awe and excited at the prospect of exploring and seeing the city. He could also the heavy concentration of arcane energy unlike any he had felt so far, as every corner of this entire place was bathed in magic. Wow, this place looks amazing, and the arcane energy here is unlike anything I've felt so far, Naruto said. Jaina turned her head back and smiled at the blonde, though she filed away the small detail of him being able to detect arcane energy. It was one thing to know about magic, but being able to sense and detect it was another, often being a sign that someone had the aptitude for magic. I told you it was great, wasn't it? You haven't seen anything yet though, wait until we are inside, Jaina said. You weren't lying, I can't wait to see what it looks like on the inside, Naruto replied. They continued on their way and eventually made their way inside the gates of the city. As they entered inside, Naruto could see many people turning towards them, and especially at the blonde who seemed to be riding with a buxom blonde apprentice. They eventually made their way to the stables and got off of their horses. Captain, you and your men are relieved of your duty for today, you deserve it. I will take Naruto to the Violet Citadel to meet with Archmage Antonidas, Jaina said. Leroy nodded his head and held a hand out to Naruto. The blonde grasped the captain's hand and shook it firmly. I don't know what brought you here, Naruto, but it was good to meet you and thank you for protecting Lady Jaina and helping her defeat the warlock, Leroy stated. It was nothing, Leroy, your men fought just as bravely and were just as vital in the fight, Naruto replied. The two nodded at each other before the captain walked off towards his men and told them to rest up. Jaina then turned towards her fellow blonde and nodded with her head for him to follow her. Naruto followed close to his new companion and gazed at the sights of the city and couldn't help but wonder how they were able to build such a city like this. Perhaps magic had a hand in helping them. Jaina looked back at the blonde and smiled at the wonder and awe on his face at the city. Do you have places and cities like this where you come from? Jaina asked, wondering what the whiskered blonde's world was like. We have settlements just as large as this back in my world, though they definitely don't have such towers and buildings like this place, Naruto replied, turning his attention back towards her. Although we did have a huge mountain with the faces of all the leaders of our village carved into it. You may not have had tall towers and buildings, but you still had flair, I see, Jaina said. It's honestly better than us, we just make boring statues of our heroes and leaders, the blonde sorcerer said. The two continued through the streets of Dalaran, heading in the direction of a large building that had several massive towers that pierced the sky. In the middle of the building, Naruto could see there was one huge tower that all others dwarfed in comparison to. Its size was so massive that even from far away where he was he could not see the tip of the tower. Before he could gaze at the tower any further, he felt something bump into his waist and nearly throw him down if he hasn't adjusted his feet in the last few seconds. He heard a large bolster's voice cry out and looked down to see someone of short but stout stature, clearly having been what bumped into him and had fallen over. Naruto looked at the person on the ground and could see he had a large beard with long hair that reached behind him. The short person also possessed a strong muscled body structure with broad shoulders, which combined with their height, looked abnormal to the blonde. Shaking off his shock at the weird-looking person in front of him, he saw he was getting up and stretched his hand out to help him in getting up. The short man grabbed his hand and pulled himself up. Sorry about that, I didn't see you there, the blonde shinobi stated, pulling the short man up. He could feel that despite his short stature, the man possessed a strong grip and strength in his hands and arms. Ah, it's alright, lad, most folk don't notice us dwarves. I'd watch where you're going though next time, especially if ye ever go to Ironforge, the short man stated in an accent that Naruto had not heard before and was only just able to hold himself back from laughing at. Jaina, seeing the situation, decided to intervene. After all, they needed to get to the Violet Citadel and meet with her teacher. Forgive my companion, Master Dwarf, it's his first time visiting Dalaran, so he has been taking in the sights, Jaina said. The dwarf gasped and bowed his head when he realized who it was that was next to the blonde that had bumped into him. Lady Jaina, I didn't see you there, forgive me my lady, the person now identified as a dwarf stated to the blonde sorceress. It's alright, Master Dwarf, no harm done, anyway it was nice meeting you, but we must be on our way, Jaina said and pulled her still confused blonde companion along with her. Naruto looked back to see the short man go back on his way and turned to the blonde bombshell next to him. Wait, Jaina, who was that and why was he so short? The confused blonde asked. Jaina blushed in embarrassment when she remembered that the shinobi was not from Azeroth and had probably never seen a dwarf before in his life. They are called dwarves, another race completely separate to humans on Azeroth. Most dwarves live on the subcontinent of Cosmodan, between the two largest human kingdoms of Stormwind and Lordaeron, and are known for their craftsmanship and tough fortitude, Jaina explained to the blonde who was taking all this information in. Naruto looked around the various citizens of the city and saw that while most were human, he could also make out some that were different. Some were the dwarves that Jaina had told him about, but there were a few others he had spotted, like the tall ones with really long pointed ears and another race that were even shorter than the dwarves. So who are the tall ones with long ears and the really short ones? I'm guessing they are other races as well, Naruto stated. Jaina giggled at the blonde's rather blunt description of the other races. The tall ones, as you call them, are the high elves. They are extremely gifted in magic and live in the kingdom of Quilthalas north of Lordaeron, Jaina said. The short ones are called gnomes. They are brilliant inventors and highly intelligent. They mainly live in the region of Cosmodan in the city of Namaragan and are a part of the alliance like the dwarves. This place gets more and more interesting every day, the blonde stated, taking in all the information that his companion told him. Do you not have any other races where you come from? Jaina asked, trying to get more information about the blonde or his world. Well, not really, it's mainly just humans. The only thing we have other than that are the animal summons that are sentient and have intelligence just like humans, but they mainly live in their own separate realms. The blonde stated they only really enter our side when they are summoned or to sign a contract with a potential summoner. That sounds interesting. Do these summons grant any powers? Jaina asked. The information the blonde shared with her, only increasing the air of mystery around him and leading to more questions. They mainly helped by fighting alongside the people they have contracts with, Naruto replied. Do you have one? Jaina inquired further. Naruto looked at his companion with mischievous look in his eyes. Maybe or maybe not. The blonde replied. Jaina grumbled and sighed at her companion's non-answer and continued forward at a faster pace. Hey, wait up, Naruto said, increasing his pace to catch up to her. Eventually the two blondes were able to make their way through the city and to the Violet Citadel located in the heart of the city. Its eyes looked even more staggering up close and its massive towers stretched up into the sky. The citadel had many small towers dotted around the structure, but they all paled in comparison to the massive tower that stood in the center of the building. It stretched high into the air and looked to nearly reach the clouds. Around the tower he could see a massive disc-like structure that spun around the tower with several large crystals surrounding it. Naruto gazed in awe at the massive structure and admired the beauty of it all. Jaina looked to see the blonde was still admiring the citadel and grabbed his arm to gain his attention. Naruto looked away from the structure and to the blonde sorceress. Come on, let's go inside. My teacher Archmage Antonidas is inside. He can help us with getting rid of the mana poisoning in your body and could help you with finding your world, Jaina said to the blonde. Naruto nodded his head and the two climbed the massive stairs leading into the building and made their way inside. As the two of them made their way inside the building, Naruto took in the surroundings of the citadel. He could see many mages walking around the citadel. Some carrying books and scrolls and others with various devices and what looked to be old artifacts that give off strong magical energy. In fact, he could feel that this entire city pulsed with huge magical energy that dwarfed anything he had during his short time on Azeroth. He did not know why he was able to sense magic or any of the other strange energies of this planet, but he was eager to get to the bottom of this and find out. Before he could ponder any further, he heard a voice call out the name of his blonde companion and turned to where it had originated from. He looked to see a tall man with long blonde hair and deep bright blue eyes similar to his own. Taking a closer look at him, he saw that the man wasn't actually human, but one of the high elves that Jaina had told him about. He saw the man was wearing a very regal set of mage robes that were colored red with a gold trim and had extremely large shoulder pauldrons that to Naruto looked quite excessive. Jaina, the man called out to the blonde sorceress walking over to the two blondes. Jaina turned her head to where the voice had come from to see a familiar face. Hail, it's good to see you again, Jaina said to the high elf. How was your trip to Lordaeron and who might this be? The now named Kale asked while nodding his head towards Naruto. Naruto returned the nod from the man. It's how it's been normally with Arthas the past few months, just non-stop arguing anyway, enough about him. This is Naruto. I met him on the way back through some unique circumstances, Jaina told the high elf. Naruto, this is Kael'thas Sunstrider, Prince of Quilthalas, and one of the archmages on the Council of Six here in Dalaran. She introduced the high elf prince to the shinobi. Naruto Uzumaki, it's good to meet a friend of Jaina's. Naruto outstretched his hand for a handshake. The high elf took the hand and shook it and was surprised at the strength of the blonde stranger. Naruto, not to be rude, but you have a strange name and the look and strength of a powerful warrior, Kael'thas said to the blonde. I could say the same to you, Prince Kael'thas. Naruto replied back. Number. Please, just Kale is fine, any friend of Jaina's is a friend of mine, the high elf prince stated in a fairly friendly tone, though Naruto could detect some edge from the elf's tone. Maybe the two mages had some history and the prince saw him as competition. "Naruto, is it okay?" Jaina said, staring into the blonde's eyes, and Naruto could see in hers that she was looking to see if it was okay to tell the High Elf Prince. Naruto smiled and nodded his head to the blonde sorceress. Jaina smiled back and turned back to Kael'thas. "Kale, prepare yourself for this," Jaina said to the elf. Kale raised his brow at this and nodded his head. "Naruto is not from Azeroth, he arrived here through a dimensional tear and landed in front of me, believe it or not," Jaina said. Kay had not expected that to be what Jaina was going to tell him, and by this point, his full attention was gained. He nodded his head for Jaina to continue. "When he arrived here, the arcane energies entered his system and started to poison his body. I was able to stabilize his body and prevent them from doing any further damage, but that won't hold for much longer." The High Elf Prince thought for a moment and pondered on the information provided to him before turning his attention to the blonde dimension hopper. "If you don't mind, let me examine you for a moment with my magic and see if there's anything I can do. I might not be as proficient with arcane magic as Archmage Antonidas, but I can try and see if I can help," Kael'thas stated. Naruto gained an unsure look on his face and wasn't sure if he should allow this stranger to examine him with something he barely knew. Jaina had only been able to examine due to him being unconscious, so he looked to his blonde companion to see what she thought of this. Jaina smiled reassuringly at the blonde and nodded her head. Naruto decided to take her reassurance, having grown to trust the blonde apprentice now, and nodded his head at Kael'thas for him to give him the go-ahead. Kael'thas stepped closer to the blonde and placed his hand on his shoulder. Closing his eyes, he called upon his magic and began to examine the blonde. The prince of the high elves could see the damage that had been done on the blonde's body by the mana poisoning. He could also see that the blonde's body had recovered somewhat from its effects, but the mana would have to be purged from his system. Delving further into this, he could see some other energy different to anything he had felt on Azeroth within the blonde and decided to investigate it further. All at once Kael'thas felt a massive amount of energy bombard him. It was nothing like he had felt an immortal soul before, and there was only one other energy source he had felt that matched this power. The Sunwell, the ancient font of power that his ancestors had created long ago when they had moved to Quilthalas millennia ago. Kael'thas pulled back suddenly and removed his hand from the blonde's shoulder, gasping, having never expected that rush of energy so quickly. "Are you alright?" Naruto asked, having not expected that to happen at all. "I'm fine, I just wasn't expecting an energy like that within you," Kael said. He straightened himself up and compassed himself before speaking to the two blondes. "We need to get you to Archmage Antonidas. It's extremely important that he has a look at you. I haven't felt an energy like yours before in a person. The only thing that matches it would be the Sunwell, an ancient font of power that my ancestors created long ago." Jaina looked to the blonde shinobi and offered him a reassuring smile and nod, and the trio headed to where the Archmage was located. They arrived at the Archmage's quarters, and Naruto could see that it was quite a large and extravagant chamber that contained all sorts of unique items and, based on the blonde's untrained eye, what looked to be magical artifacts. He followed the other two blondes into the chamber and could see an elderly man with a large graybeard dressed in extravagant purple robes, reading from a giant tome that was radiating a lot of magical energy. The elderly man who Naruto suspected was the Archmage. "Ah, Jaina, Prince Kael'thas, it's good to see you, and who might your companion be?" Antonidas asked, greeting the trio. The trio exchanged greetings with the Archmage and explained the blonde shinobi's situation to the Archmage. Antonidas gazed at the blonde shinobi that his student had brought to him, and he could attest to what the two blonde mages had told him. "I will need you to lay down so that I can extract the arcane energy that is inside your system," Antonidas said to the blonde. Naruto thought for a few minutes and nodded at the Archmage and laid down on the examination table. Antonidas called upon his magic and examined the blonde's body. He could feel the vast amount of Phorian energy within the blonde. Examining further, he could feel the vast amount of energy being changed, transformed into arcane energy. Thinking for a moment, he knew that he would be able to help the blonde by cleansing the current of arcane energy within the blonde, but knew that if the blonde was to really be from the poison, and for it to not affect the blonde in the future. Antonidas called upon the energy and drained the magic within the blonde. Antonidas pulled the energy into himself and unleashed it, causing it to dissipate. Naruto opened his eyes and got up from the table, looking down at his hands and clenched his fist. He could feel some of his chakra returning to him and some strength returning to his body. "I have removed the arcane energy inside your body, but there's an issue that we need to discuss," Antonidas stated. "What issue would that be?" Naruto asked. "The mana poisoning has been removed, but in time it will return as this foreign energy. This chakra that you mentioned is currently being turned into arcane energy. In order for it to no longer be an issue, you will need to learn how to harness and control arcane energy," Antonidas told him. Naruto gazed down onto his hand, thinking about what had been told to him. He didn't know what this meant when it came to his chakra, and especially what it meant for Kurama and the Biju. He had fought and had finally freed Kurama from his hatred. Will magic allow me to return to my home? Naruto asked. Yes, it's entirely possible with enough time, control and knowledge, one is able to travel between worlds, the archmage said. He could see that the blonde was going through a lot of mental turmoil and needed time to process all this information. Jaina, escort Naruto to one of the guest chambers within the citadel so that he can rest, Antonita stated to his student. Jaina nodded to her teacher and guided the blonde out of the archmage's quarters. I have a feeling he will play a big role in the future of Azeroth, Antonita stated. You think so, archmage? Kilthas asked. Yes, when I examined him I could feel that he had a spark I have not seen in a long time, an unwavering spirit, one that even after all this tribulation has still not given up, the archmage replied. We will see who Naruto Uzumaki is and what he will mean for Azeroth. So this part ends here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, so quickly like this video for second part of this series. And comment down below your thoughts about this series. And now it's time for me to go, bye.